So after scoring touchdowns in Nebraska, the Michigan Wolverines players mimed like they were eating corn off the cob against the Cornhuskers. We'll see if they have any Minnesota-themed celebrations this week as we welcome in Anthony Bellino. You see him every morning right here on BCSN on the X's and Bros Show. Anthony, thank you so much.
Mark, it's always a pleasure. I like the corn celebration, where they used to move their helmets and kind of, move their. I'm a fan of that. I thought that was pretty creative. Can't be 6-0 if you don't start off 5-0, and that's where we're at with the maize and blue, my friend.
The most complete game we've seen out of Michigan in a long time in that win over Nebraska. I'm not sure there's a whole lot we can nitpick about this one.
No, nitpicking completely out the window. It's really weird, too. 93, 95 degrees or whatever it was with winds between 20 and 30 miles per hour all game long. And Michigan just came out and did really what they do best, right? From a defensive standpoint, Nebraska really couldn't do much of anything. They couldn't. I mean, they had 199 yards passing from Heinrich Herberg. That's an awesome name, by the way. Heinrich, that's an old school one. They did get 100 yards on the ground, so congratulations to them for being able to hit the century mark rushing the football. But Michigan defensively held Nebraska, shut them out until the fourth quarter, garbage time, and it was one big play, so what are you going to do? But offensively, I think that this team, when you talk about balance, that's where it's at. I know they carried the ball, I think 50 plus times, maybe 51, if I'm not mistaken. Only threw it 23 times. I don't want to throw if we're going into the wind anyways. That opening drive, I thought they really set the tone. They get a turnover there early as well, and then they just started churning. And how about that catch from Roman Wilson? Arguably the kid from Bowling Green on the same day, also up there for catch of the year. The one-hander in the end zone, that was sensational. But Roman Wilson jumping over the top of a Nebraska defender and catching the ball basically on that young man's back, that was simply incredible. He continues to lead the nation from a receiving perspective in touchdown receptions. You have Blake Corum leading the nation right now in rushing touchdowns. It's a good balanced attack. The offense is moving. The defense, it's Nebraska. And look, I know Uncle Urban thought this game was going to be close because Nebraska allegedly shoulda, coulda, woulda, but didn't beat Minnesota. And I heard all of that malarkey on the Fox pregame show. I was there, Mark. I was tuned in. I listened to that bullwash. Let me tell you this much. There was no way on God's green earth Nebraska was winning that football game on Saturday. Not a chance. I thought Brady Quinn gave some very fair, honest, balanced opinions, and everything that Brady Quinn said would come true basically did. He said they're not going to have any answer for Roman Wilson, that J.J. McCarthy's a dark horse for Heisman. I think that's a little bold. He just doesn't have the individual statistics to be in that sort of race, because that's what that is. That's a numbers cruncher dream right there. But Brady Quinn was right. The defense was going to be too much. Offensively, too many weapons. Nebraska isn't there yet. Hopefully Matt Rule can get the Huskers and return them to the late 90s. I doubt that happens, but hopefully he can get them somewhere close to where they are a perennial 8-10 win team and kind of bolster that Big Ten on that side of the map a little bit. But there was no chance they were beating the Maize and Blue on Saturday.
Let's talk a little bit more about J.J. McCarthy. I think he had 4 incompletions, 2 touchdown passes. Not good enough according to his standard, but he's got a high standard. But only played the first series of the third quarter. Then we started to see some of the backup quarterbacks. And you mentioned Heisman Trophy and J.J. McCarthy. You're right. He's not going to have the numbers because Jim Harbaugh's not going to have him play 4 quarters most games if the season goes as Michigan hopes it does go. And that was maybe one of the underlying currents of discussion on Monday with Jim Harbaugh about the unselfishness of the team, the unselfishness of the program. And it starts at the quarterback and it goes to every phase of the program.
Yeah, it really is a, you got to be the sum has got to be greater than the parts, right? It's got to be we before me. And when you have guys like J.J. McCarthy in that sort of position with NFL scouts all clamoring all over, in a very loaded quarterback class, mind you, as well. This year's class, you could see, more than 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round. Is J.J. McCarthy going to be in that conversation because he's not stacking up statistically? Or the scouts going to trust basically what they see? Or does he come back? When you have a young man that is more worried about accomplishing the team goal first versus all of his individual, I think that's such a high standard to set, especially at that singular position. And then the trickle down effect, right? Where you have Blake Corum, who's getting a bulk of the work. Donovan Edwards did get some more carries, had some angry runs out there on Saturday, but the yardage just isn't there. He'll get his time, I think, but I thought he looked a little bit different. Khalil Mullins, maybe there was, the talk about Mullins getting more touches. Maybe that was kind of in the back of Donovan Edwards' mind. I'm not really sure. But there isn't that one guy that's out there. I mean, look at Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson on the perimeter, for God's sakes. I mean, at the wide receiver position, Nico Collins is having a nice year, and it's fun that CJ Stroud is his quarterback there in Houston for the Texans. That's a cool story. But Michigan, I mean, outside of Donovan Peoples-Jones, where are the wide receivers that have gone to the next level? And Jim Harbaugh really prides himself, and he made mention of this last week, and we talked about it, the whole tread on the tires thing, right? What is your shelf life as a football player, and how do your touches stack up from college, then leading into the pros, especially at a position like running back, but in the wide receiver room as well? Everybody seems to be so focused on what their goal is, and that is, one, win each week, but two, win the Big Ten. You win the Big Ten, you get into the college football playoff. The committee is already, they've acknowledged that on multiple occasions, that winning that conference is good enough. You've got 3 teams right now in the conference that are in the top 10. Everybody knows what they're fighting for, right? Everybody knows that even if you win the Big Ten and get to the college football playoff, if you don't win a semifinal game, that's not good enough anymore. It's a standard that is set, and it's a standard that's not set with statistics that are running in garbage time. What matters is that our team has more points than your team at the end of the day, and I think that that's important, even for people like us, right? I mean, I nitpick at stats all the time. I mean, 12 of 16 for 156 and 2 touchdowns. What'd you do the rest of it? I mean, was his girlfriend down on the sidelines? What was going on there? I mean, my goodness, what's happening here? But at the end of the day, they're undefeated, and they're ranked number 2 in the country, and it's a loaded college football top to bottom right now. I mean, the top 9 teams in the AP poll are all undefeated, and there's more undefeated teams outside of the top 10 right now. It's a great year for college football, but it's a great year for your team to be really good at college football, not just an individual with some gaudy stats.
Going back to the Michigan wide receivers, Roman Wilson, 8 touchdown catches. I believe under Jim Harbaugh, the most touchdown catches for a receiver is only 9. So Roman Wilson looks like he's got a good chance of blowing that out of the water this season. Against Nebraska, because of some injuries, we saw a little bit of a different look on the Michigan offensive line, and perhaps this is going to be the look going forward, because you can't really nitpick too much with how well the offensive line played against the Cornhuskers, a pretty decent Cornhusker defense at that.
Yeah, I mean, Nebraska was, I forget what they were at, maybe top 5 in the country in rush defense or something like that. And then Michigan runs for 249 yards. I think that anytime you have any sort of injury on the offensive line, communication is key, right? That's priority number 1. They have to be able to identify protections. And then 2, you got to be able to want to get off the ball. And I was listening to the UT coaches show on Monday, and I thought it was very interesting. Jason Candle was talking about not only protecting the quarterback, but you have to protect your offensive line. He brought up a really good point. He said, you can't start off with 10 consecutive dropbacks, right? Because then your offensive line constantly feels like they're already going backwards. You need to be able to put your foot in the ground and go forward. And I thought that was really important, because that's really the mantra that Michigan uses. They want to run that football. And anytime that you're substituting on the offensive line, when an offensive lineman knows, okay, all I have to do is I got to find my guy, whether it's a zone blocking scheme, get to my zone, or if it's man up, I just got to get my hands on my guy, and I have to do my job to the best of my ability. My back's behind me. I have confidence in them. They're going to get to where they need to be. Being able to run the football effectively is so important when you have new bodies in there across the front 5. And I mean, you no better school to do it at than Michigan, right? All they're going to do is run at you.
Michigan averaging over 38 points a game. The defense has only given up 30 points total this season. Only 1 touchdown against the starting defense for the Michigan Wolverines. That was that Rutgers blip a couple of weeks ago. And Chris Partridge, the linebackers coach, came in and he brought in what he calls the 4 pillars on defense, which are angles, communication, energy, and block destruction. A very interesting way of looking at defense with block destruction.
Anytime you're destroying anything on the football field, I think it's fabulous. I mean, it is not a game for nice people. It's a very violent sport. And anytime that you can throw the guy who's supposed to be blocking you, if you can shed that block, and if it's a double team, if you can blow that up and get those offensive linemen a little bit off balance, if there's a chip that actually, it's a late release by a tight end and you've knocked him off of his route, you've knocked that timing off, you've done your job. I think this defense plays very well. They have given up a couple of bigger plays, but as you mentioned, that starting unit, that little blip that they had against what was that, Rutgers 2 weeks ago. Outside of that, they've been pretty much perfect, right? They've bend but don't break. They give up a couple first downs. That's like, oh no, the other team's got a first down. Like, no, this team defensively as a whole, they might not have that one individual superstar like they've had in years past, but they definitely, as a collective unit, have been playing some very good football, albeit we got to bring up the schedule again because look, they haven't seen a tight end like Brock Bowers out of Georgia. They haven't seen a quarterback like Quinn Ewers out of Texas, or anybody from the Pac-12 for that matter. So really, when you look at it from this perspective right now, sure, this team is playing very well, but at the same time, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that they haven't necessarily played the best schedule, and that can, lead to a little bit of stat inflation. It's like, monetary inflation, but like the stock market.
And that schedule doesn't necessarily get much more difficult this week as they head to Minnesota. Can PJ Fleck and company row the boat to an upset over the second-ranked Wolverines?
Roll the boat. How about this? Fire the cannons. I mean, raise the black, as they used to say. No, that boat's not going anywhere. That boat is going straight down with the Titanic, 100 feet below the surface. That boat is toast. This game right here. Oh, of course, Minnesota. Now, Little Brown Jug, they're running out of room on the Jug. I don't know if you knew that, but the Jug has got they got to find some more spots here, or we're going to have to, redo the Jug a little bit. So that's number one. It's a great rivalry. It's a lot of fun. It's a trophy game. That's cool. Outside of that, this has been so lopsided. Michigan has won the last 3, and I think 9 of the last 10. I mean, it's just a random game in which Minnesota can win. Minnesota went one time. They won in 1986 and then didn't win again until 2005. That's how this rivalry goes, right? This is all maize and blue. Unfortunately for PJ Fleck, that boat is not rowing anywhere towards the end zone. Michigan's defense dominates. The offense rolls, and it's all maize and blue, Mark.
Maybe they can do like the Stanley Cup and start adding sections of the earthenware jug to the Little Brown Jug in order to keep all those scores up there. Minnesota, a pretty good rushing attack. They've got the nation's leading rusher, but I think you look at their schedule, they haven't necessarily played a defense as good as Michigan's, as the Gophers are 3-2, limped across the victory over Louisiana Tech this past week, 1-1 in conference play. And PJ Fleck's facing some off-the-field issues as well, some questions about the morale of that program.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I'm not going to come on here and disparage PJ Fleck. It is what it is. I think that when, from my perspective on the outside looking in, I think that there are some things that are shticks, and then there are some things that actually stick. I think that the whole boat rowing thing I think it's a shtick. There's no other way for me to really put it. They beat Nebraska early. Okay. They beat Eastern Michigan 25-6. That's fine. You lose to North Carolina. You lost to Northwestern. That's a bad loss. Northwestern's not a great football team, although they had a really nice half against Penn State last week. And then, like you mentioned, you barely limped past Louisiana. I don't believe that, when you look at what they're featuring in the running game, I don't think that Darius Taylor is Mo Ibrahim. I thought that Mohamed Ibrahim is probably one of the better running backs that they've had, since maybe the, early 2000s ish, give or take 2005, 2006, since like Marion Barber. This team, they've got some issues. They're not going to be able to throw the ball. They're definitely not going to be able to run the ball. And it's going to be, the heat is going to be on there in Minnesota. Because when PJ Fleck came in, they had a lot of good momentum, a lot of juice. Everyone's feeling good about things. That's usually what happens when you have a new hire. But can you stick, right? Sustained success is the most difficult thing to do. Minnesota just has not been relevant enough. All that hype surrounding him has kind of dissipated. The national media has kind of turned a blind eye to Minnesota, and the Golden Gophers are just trying to build a dam right now to see if they can stop this wave of maize and blue there on the road. And good for Michigan, another road game, right? I mean, you played the whole first month at home. Let's go back-to-back road games and get it done. Business trip, pack your suitcases. Don't forget to pack your defense, too. You're going to need them.
Heat may be on PJ Fleck. The heat is off in Minnesota. Michigan facing perhaps a 40-degree difference in temperatures from the low 90s at Nebraska. It's going to be low 50s Saturday night in Minneapolis. I want to thank our guest from the X's and Bros Show, Anthony Bellino. Anthony, thank you so much.
And that's Mark Coons with the weather. We're back after this. Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate you, my friend.